I had to choose who would die, my wife or my unborn son. I chose my son, and it was the only right decision I ever made. Her parents think I'm a murderer. My name is Daniel. I'm 35. I haven't slept properly for almost a year, and now I'm not sleeping at all. I'm sitting in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, looking at a glass of cold coffee, realizing that in exactly 12 hours I will have to sit across from Richard and Eleanor, the parents of Sarah, my late wife, and listen to all of it again. They think I killed her. Or at least, I let her die when I could have chosen otherwise. And they won't stop until they get what they believe they deserve, the truth or punishment. In their eyes, those are the same thing. It all started when Richard called last Monday, exactly 1 month ago. We hadn't spoken since Sarah's funeral, almost 11 months ago. He called, and I saw a name on the screen that I thought I would never see again. I didn't answer. I was at work, trying to focus on numbers that had lost all meaning to me. Then a message came, "You need to talk to us. This isn't about us. This is for little Caleb. Meet us on Wednesday, 3, at your house. Otherwise, we'll just show up unannounced. We need to know why you did it. Just why you did it. No hello, no condolences, nothing." Back then, I didn't even understand what he meant by did it until I reread it. Their anger was familiar to me, but that phrasing, it broke through my armor. I replied, "Fine, Wednesday, 3. That was just the first spark, but it instantly ignited my entire existence. This month ahead was going to force me through the hell I had only just begun to forget. Sarah died a year ago during childbirth. I still can't say it calmly. The pregnancy was difficult right from the start. We had been trying for a long time, and when it finally happened, we were overjoyed, but the doctors immediately said there were risks. Sarah's heart wasn't strong. She hid it from me until we started planning for a baby. She was afraid I would refuse. When she told me, I couldn't be angry at her. I just wanted her to be safe. But she was stubborn. She wanted this child more than anything. The month before the delivery, when she was admitted to the clinic, the situation rapidly worsened. She started bleeding, and her blood pressure dropped critically. The doctor, Dr. Hopkins, I remember his tired face as if it were now, took me into a separate room and spoke plainly. "Daniel, we cannot save both. A decision must be made now. Either we stabilize Sarah, but we will lose the baby, or we perform an emergency C-section to try and save your son, but Sarah's heart might not withstand the strain. Given her condition, it's almost certain death for her." I stood there staring at him. Dr. Hopkins' words sounded like a death sentence. Couldn't breathe. I saw 2 paths before me, and both led to unbearable pain. But there was one detail I couldn't ignore. Something Sarah told me when we thought everything was fine, but she was just sharing her fears. She said, "If anything happens, Daniel, you have to choose Caleb. You must give him life. That's what I am willing to risk everything for." It wasn't just a casual phrase. It was her wish, expressed with a force that I couldn't forget. She knew the risks. She had essentially given me instructions. And now, here I was, facing 2 people I love, and I had to choose. I closed my eyes and told Dr. Hopkins, "Save the son. Please save Caleb." Sarah didn't survive. Caleb, our son, did. That was a year ago. He is now 1 year old and sleeping in the next room. He is my everything, and I don't regret choosing him. It was fulfilling her last wish. But Richard and Eleanor don't know about my conversation with her. They only know that I chose our son's life over their daughter's. For them, it is a betrayal. After their message last Monday, I began to realize what they were planning. They don't just want to talk. They want to take Caleb away from me. They believe that as the man who allowed their daughter to die, I have no right to raise their grandson. That's what, for little Caleb, meant. Tomorrow is Wednesday. I have to pretend I'm ready to talk, but I'm only ready to defend my son. Should I tell them the truth about my conversation with Sarah? Or is it better to keep that secret to protect her memory, which they are trying to tarnish with their accusations? This is the dilemma that is killing me. Either way, this won't be a conversation. It will be a war. I feel the tension building, and this is just the beginning. I don't know how I'm going to get through this month. I just know I won't give them my son. When her parents arrived, they didn't look at me. They looked right past me, straight at the baby monitor in the hall. That's when I knew they were here to seize control, not to grieve. Wednesday arrived with a cold, unforgiving rain. It felt deliberate, like the weather was actively trying to match the dread settling in my gut. I spent the morning preparing the house, making it look meticulous and neutral, as if cleanliness could somehow shield me from their judgment. Caleb was with his sitter, Linda, a solid, reliable woman who had been a lifeline this past year. I needed him out of the house. I couldn't risk the sight of him softening their resolve or, worse, hardening it further. The doorbell rang precisely at 3. Richard and Eleanor stood there, framed by the pouring rain. They didn't bring flowers or a casserole, which used to be the default for their visits when Sarah was alive. They brought briefcases, 2 of them. That's all I needed to see to confirm this was not a social call. This was a legal ambush. Richard, my father-in-law, is a man whose anger simmers beneath a veneer of corporate professionalism. He's tall, always impeccably dressed, even now, dripping slightly from the rain. Eleanor, Sarah's mother, is the quiet storm. She says less, but every glance is a precise, painful weapon. I invited them in, trying to keep my voice flat, professional, mimicking his demeanor. Thank you for coming. Richard didn't offer a handshake. He stepped past me. His eyes immediately scanned the living room, bypassing me entirely. They settled on the baby monitor sitting innocently on the side table. It was the focus of his attention, not me, the man they accused of betrayal. Eleanor walked in behind him, her face a mask of sculpted grief and controlled fury. She didn't look at me either. She walked straight to the mantelpiece, where a framed photo of Sarah stood. She picked it up, ran a thumb over the glass, and then carefully, deliberately, turned the photo face down. The message was clear. My house was no longer a shrine to our life. It was a crime scene of their loss. Let's get this done, Daniel, Richard said, dropping his briefcase on the dining table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. We aren't here for small talk or reminiscing. I led them to the dining room, sitting opposite them. It felt less like a family meeting and more like a deposition. We want the records. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice low, raspy. It was the first time she had spoken directly to me in a year. Every single piece of documentation from St. Jude's Hospital regarding the last 2 days. We want the doctor's notes, the nurse's logs, the signed waivers, everything. I hesitated. I had those documents. They were locked in my safe, gathering dust next to the official certificate of death. Why? I asked. It's all been reviewed. The hospital cleared everything. There was an internal review. They confirmed it was a necessary emergency procedure. Richard leaned forward, resting his hands on the table, his eyes drilling into mine. The procedure, yes. The choice, that's what concerns us. Daniel, you were the one who signed off on the decision to prioritize the child's life over Sarah's stabilization. We know this much. We had an acquaintance pull the partial file. The way he said prioritize made it sound like I had ordered a meal, not made a life-and-death decision. It was a split-second impossible decision, I argued, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. The doctors told me. We know what the doctors told you, Eleanor cut in, her gaze relentless. But we want to know what Sarah told you. We want to know why you, the man who supposedly loved her, decided that her son's potential future was worth more than her definite present. They were pushing the exact boundary I had fortified. They were circling the conversation I had with Sarah, the secret instruction she gave me, the only thing that made my choice bearable. If I revealed that, they would turn their anger on her, accuse her of negligence or a death wish. I couldn't let them desecrate her memory like that. It was my burden to carry, not hers. I looked at them, taking a slow, deep breath. I won't be handing over any more records. The medical facts are clear. Your grief is understandable, but your accusations are baseless. I acted on the information provided by the medical team to save our son, who is Sarah's son. Richard reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope. We filed a petition this morning, Daniel. We are contesting your fitness as a sole parent, given your catastrophic lapse in judgment under pressure. We believe Caleb needs a stable, safe environment with relatives who will respect his mother's memory. We are seeking temporary custody immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. Temporary custody. They weren't just angry. They were coming for my son. This wasn't about the truth. It was about possession. You can't do that, I whispered, the blood draining from my face. We just did, Richard replied, sliding the envelope across the table. It stopped right at my edge. And we are prepared to bring up everything we find in court, including the fact that you haven't been back to the clinic since the day she died. Why? Guilt? We want to know the real reason you chose him, Daniel. And we have a month to force it out of you. This is the only warning you get. I grabbed the envelope. My hand was shaking. They knew I was hiding something, and they were using Caleb as leverage. I knew I couldn't fight them in silence. I had to counterattack, but if I told them about Sarah's wish, they would find a way to twist it. The tension in the room was suffocating. I had 29 days left before the preliminary hearing, and they had just fired the opening shot of the war for my son. Richard handed me the court summons for Caleb's custody hearing, and then threw Sarah's engagement ring at me. He said I forfeited the right to mourn the moment I signed her death warrant. This wasn't grief anymore. It was a calculated attack. After they left, I sat at the dining table for an hour, staring at the thick manila envelope Richard had thrown at me. The summons was real. They weren't just making noise. They were serious. They had initiated legal proceedings to declare me unfit and seize temporary custody of Caleb. The date on the document was 3 weeks out. 21 agonizing days until I stood in court against the people who should be helping me raise my son. But the worst part wasn't the lawsuit itself. It was the moment Richard opened his second briefcase. Not the one with the legal papers, but the one filled with Sarah's personal effects. He pulled out a small velvet box and, with a motion too casual, too deliberate for the action, he opened it and dumped the contents on the table. Sarah's simple gold wedding band and her modest diamond engagement ring. You forfeited these the moment you chose, Richard said, his voice quiet, which was far more chilling than his shouting. They belong to the family now. You have no right to them. You don't get to pretend you were a grieving husband when you acted as her executioner. He looked me dead in the eye, and for the first time I saw not just anger, but a profound, cold hatred. Then he picked up the engagement ring and threw it at me. It slid across the polished wood, hitting the edge of the custody papers before falling silently into my lap. That act, throwing the ring, changed everything. It was no longer about them mourning their daughter. This was about retribution and control. Over the next week, the tension became unbearable. They hired a ruthless attorney named Martha Cole. She sent a barrage of discovery requests, demanding access not just to my medical files and therapy notes, but also to my financial records from the last 5 years. They were digging for any evidence of instability, any moral failing they could exploit to paint me as an unfit father. The pressure cooker really burst when Richard showed up at my office downtown on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a major project, trying desperately to focus and keep my job, which was the only remaining source of stability. He walked past my secretary without an appointment and stood in the doorway of my cubicle, drawing every eye in the vicinity. I need to speak with you, now. His voice was low, but carrying enough menace to stop me cold. I led him into an empty conference room, closing the door behind us. What are you doing here, Richard? This is unprofessional. And harassment. He scoffed, leaning against the polished mahogany table. Unprofessional? You think I care about professional boundaries when my grandson's welfare is at stake? I did some checking, Daniel. I found out that 6 months before Caleb was conceived, Sarah's health insurance application was rejected due to a pre-existing cardiac condition. A serious one. My stomach dropped. He knew about her heart. Not the full extent, but enough to build a case. And I also found a life insurance policy, Daniel, he continued, his tone turning venomous. A large one, signed just 3 weeks before she got pregnant, naming you as the sole beneficiary. It had a specific clause for death during childbirth. I felt the blood drain from my face. This was it. This was the dark undercurrent they were aiming for. That's a lie, I insisted, though my voice was shaky. We got life insurance because we were having a child, like any responsible parents. But the timing, Daniel, he hissed, stepping closer. And the amount. Enough to pay off this house and retire early. You knew she had a weak heart. You knew the risks were extreme. And you chose the baby, who, conveniently, inherits all that money once he's 18, over the woman who signed over her life for your financial security. You had a motive to make that choice, Daniel. A big one. This was the hard, brutal conflict I knew was coming. They weren't just accusing me of a mistake. They were accusing me of premeditated murder for financial gain. You are insane, I managed, my hands balled into fists. I loved Sarah. She was my life. The insurance was her idea. She wanted to protect Caleb no matter what. And how convenient that she left you the power to make the final call, Richard countered, his eyes shining with triumph. You claim she told you to save the baby. Show me proof, Daniel. A note? A text? A will? Anything that supports this convenient deathbed wish. Because right now, what I see is a man who was handed $1 million payout on the death of his wife. And I will make sure the judge sees it too. He had backed me into a corner. If I reveal Sarah's secret instruction now, they'll simply dismiss it as a self-serving lie, inventing an alibi to cover up the insurance motive. But if I don't, the motive will destroy me in court and cost me my son. I looked at Richard, the man who had loved Sarah and was now actively trying to destroy the only thing she left behind. Get out of my office, Richard. If you try to contact me here again, I'm filing a police report. He didn't move. He just smiled, a cold, sadist smile. The clock is ticking, Daniel. You have 3 weeks to decide if you want to be known as a grieving father or a wealthy widower who made a calculated choice. The truth is coming out one way or another. He walked out, leaving my career in tatters and my stomach churning with pure, desperate fear. He had weaponized the insurance policy and the secret decision. Now the stakes were not just Caleb, but my entire reputation and freedom. I had to find a way to discredit their financial motive before the hearing, but the only defense I had was Sarah's secret wish, and I couldn't risk revealing that yet. The knot of tension had become a noose. I went to the safe deposit box to retrieve the one piece of evidence that could disprove their financial motive. But instead of the document I needed, I found a letter from Sarah. The letter didn't just complicate my defense, it detonated it. The week following Richard's visit to my office was a blur of panic and caffeine. I was being sued for custody and effectively accused of murder for financial gain. My attorney, a tired but competent public defender I hired after realizing how serious Richard's lawyer, Martha Cole, was, advised me that the insurance policy was the biggest threat. We need to show the judge that the insurance money was never a factor in your decision, Daniel, he explained during our frantic 10-minute phone calls. We need to prove you weren't financially desperate, and crucially, we need to show that Sarah herself was the driving force behind the policy, not you. That gave me an idea. I remembered a conversation with Sarah months before she got pregnant. She had opened a separate investment account, one she managed entirely herself, using a small inheritance from her grandmother. She had mentioned wanting a safety net for the future, something completely independent of my salary or our joint accounts. If I could show that she had independent wealth designated solely for Caleb's future, it would severely weaken Richard's motive argument about my greed. I dug out the old key to the safe deposit box we shared at the bank, the one she mostly used. I hadn't been there since she died. I drove to the bank late Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks into this nightmare month. Inside the small, private viewing room, I pulled out the heavy metal box. It was mostly filled with old paperwork, tax returns, deeds, and a few pieces of jewelry. I finally found the file marked Caleb's Fund. My hands were shaking as I opened it. There was the official documentation confirming a trust fund for Caleb, established and fully funded by Sarah 6 months before the pregnancy. Exactly as I remembered. This was solid proof of her foresight and independent action. Relief washed over me, a momentary respite in the suffocating tension. But tucked beneath the investment papers was a small, sealed envelope addressed to me in Sarah's elegant handwriting. For Daniel, only if I don't make it. I hesitated. I had never seen this before. It was a clear breach of my promise to her, the promise to carry her secret instruction to the grave. But the legal battle raging now threatened to expose everything anyway, and this letter felt like a final lifeline. I had to know what she wrote. I tore the envelope open. Inside, it wasn't a tearful farewell, but a detailed, pragmatic letter. Sarah, exactly as I knew her, facing the worst possible reality with absolute clarity. She wrote about her love for me and Caleb. She reiterated her wish for me to choose Caleb. You know my heart, Daniel. I want him to live, no matter the cost. Then the floor fell out from under me. The last paragraph of the letter was a bombshell. She revealed that weeks before she entered the clinic, Dr. Hopkins had given her a confidential, private medical assessment. She knew the severity of her condition was even worse than she had let on to me. Daniel, I have to confess something I couldn't tell you face to face. The doctors ran a final set of diagnostics last month. The truth is, my heart is deteriorating faster than they admitted. Dr. Hopkins told me, privately, that even if they stabilized me and saved me now, the damage is irreversible. He gave me a maximum of 6 to 9 months to live, even without the delivery trauma. I would have died anyway, Daniel, probably within the year. The delivery simply accelerated the inevitable. I made Dr. Hopkins promise not to tell you. I couldn't bear to see your sorrow while I was still here. When you are forced to make that horrific choice, know this, you aren't choosing between my life and Caleb's life. You are choosing between Caleb's life and a few more agonizing months of mine. Choose him. Always choose him. Don't let your grief over my inevitable death cost him his chance at life. I love you, and I am so sorry for making this the way it has to be. I reread the lines, my world shattering again. The moral dilemma I had lived with for a year wasn't even real. I hadn't sacrificed her life for Caleb's future. I had merely hastened an end that was already determined, fulfilling her deepest wish in the process. She knew. She hid the full, terminal prognosis from me and the world, and she manipulated the situation to ensure her son lived while sparing me the agonizing knowledge that she was doomed either way. This letter was the ultimate proof of my innocence. It removed all traces of financial or moral malfeasance. It explained everything. But it also revealed that Dr. Hopkins had actively hidden critical information from me and from the official medical file. If I presented this letter in court, it would not only vindicate me but also destroy Dr. Hopkins' career and trigger a massive medical negligence investigation. The very situation Sarah wanted to avoid. She wanted peace, not a scandal. I was left with the ultimate brutal choice. Use the letter. Save my son from Richard and Eleanor, clear my name, and destroy the memory of Sarah by dragging her terminal diagnosis and the doctor's cover-up through a sensational custody battle. Keep the letter secret. Lose the custody battle. Let Richard and Eleanor think I'm a greedy betrayer, but protect Sarah's memory and Dr. Hopkins' promise. I looked at the investment papers, the proof of financial non-motive, and the letter, the proof of my moral innocence. The court hearing was only 2 weeks away. The tension was now internal, agonizing. I felt the weight of Sarah's final sacrifice press down on me. What was the right move? Protecting my son or protecting her legacy? The two things I cherished most were now mutually exclusive. I stood in the courtroom, watching Richard and Eleanor prepare to paint me as a murderer driven by an insurance payout. The only thing that could save me was the letter, the one piece of evidence Sarah begged me to keep secret. I had to decide right then. Justice for myself or peace for her soul. The morning of the preliminary custody hearing was bright and sickeningly sunny, 2 weeks after I found Sarah's letter. I sat in my lawyer's small office near the courthouse, the envelope containing the letter and the trust fund documents resting heavily in my briefcase. Richard and Eleanor, along with Martha Cole, were already waiting across the street. My lawyer, Mr. Hayes, was sweating, despite the air conditioning. Daniel, we've reviewed the investment trust documents. They're good. They establish Sarah's financial foresight, which counters the greedy widower narrative. But it's not enough to fully dismiss the motive. Cole will still focus on the timing of the large life insurance policy you did benefit from. We need more. Do you have anything else? He meant the letter. I looked at the briefcase. The truth was right there, a few inches away. It would clear my name, save Caleb, and expose Sarah's agonizing sacrifice and Dr. Hopkins' ethical breach. No, I lied, swallowing the metallic taste of fear and guilt. That's all I have. Use the trust documents and stick to the doctor's official statement. Necessary emergency procedure. I couldn't do it. I couldn't break Sarah's final trust. She died to shield me from the pain of knowing her death was inevitable and to give Caleb life without scandal. If I used that letter now, the custody battle would pivot into a medical negligence lawsuit, dragging her last wishes and private medical details through the public mud. Richard and Eleanor would never find peace, only a new form of agonizing grief. I couldn't trade her peace for my personal freedom. We walked into the courtroom. It was small, sterile, and cold. Martha Cole, Richard and Eleanor's attorney, was sharp and merciless. She started immediately, ignoring the trust fund documents my lawyer presented. She focused entirely on the life insurance policy and the split-second decision I made. Mr. Daniel Harrison, she said, her voice echoing in the small room. Isn't it true that you stood to gain nearly $1 million upon your wife's death, and that you chose to terminate her life support, effectively, in favor of a situation that guaranteed that payout? Objection. Mischaracterization of the medical procedure. Mr. Hayes stammered. Sustained, the judge said, but the damage was done. Richard and Eleanor sat behind Cole, their faces set in stone, believing every word. Eleanor wouldn't even look at me. Then, Richard stood up, ignoring Cole's sharp gesture to sit down. He looked at the judge, ignoring the procedure. Your Honor, with all due respect, this man is lying. Richard's voice was strained, thick with a year of unresolved pain. He says he loved her, yet he chose the money and the potential heir over her. He has never once explained why he made that choice. He just stands behind the doctors. He won't tell us the truth because the truth is that he let her go. He was right. I hadn't told them the truth of Sarah's wish. My silence was my biggest weapon and my deepest flaw. I looked directly at Richard, past the lawyers, past the judge. This was the moment of climax, but it wasn't a shouting match. It was a choice. I opened my mouth not to use the letter, but to tell them the partial, agonizing truth I could legally prove. Richard, Eleanor, I did not choose money. I chose my son. But the reason I made that choice is simple. Sarah made me promise. The courtroom went silent. Even Cole looked surprised. She knew the risks. Weeks before the delivery, she told me word for word that if it ever came down to a choice, I had to save Caleb. She told me giving him life was the only thing that mattered to her. I honored her dying wish. It wasn't the full truth, it didn't include the terminal diagnosis, but it was the truth of the burden I carried. Richard laughed. A harsh, broken sound that hurt my ears. A convenient deathbed wish, Daniel. A phantom promise to cover up your greed. Show us proof. Put the doctor on the stand. My lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, Daniel, the letter. We have to use the letter. I shook my head, a minuscule movement that sealed my fate. No. The judge, seeing the impasse and the raw emotion, stopped the hearing. Enough. The court recognizes the extreme emotional circumstances and the complexity of the medical decision. Mr. Harrison, the court finds the allegations of financial malfeasance largely unsubstantiated by the independent trust fund documents, but your conduct and refusal to offer a full explanation of the choice raise serious questions about your judgment under pressure. However, the child is currently stable and thriving in your care. He looked at Richard and Eleanor. I will not grant temporary custody, but I am ordering structured, supervised visitation for the grandparents, starting immediately. And I am reserving the right to review the full custody arrangement in 3 months, contingent on Mr. Harrison's cooperation and his ability to establish a civil, stable relationship with his son's maternal grandparents. We didn't win. We didn't lose. We were put on probation. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. Richard and Eleanor walked past me. Richard's eyes were still full of hatred, but Eleanor stopped. She looked at me, her expression shifting from fury to a fragile, searching doubt. "She made you promise?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell us that, Daniel?" I looked at her, at the raw wound of her grief. "Because I knew you wouldn't believe me," I said simply. "And because I didn't want to give you any more pain." I left them standing there, the custody papers in my hand, the secret letter burning a hole in my briefcase. I had protected Sarah's final act of love and sacrifice, but at a huge personal cost. The battle was paused, not ended. They would keep fighting for Caleb, and I would keep fighting to defend Sarah's memory by staying silent. I looked up at the sky. I had saved Caleb's life, and I had fulfilled Sarah's wish, but I had failed to achieve peace. The truth, the whole, unvarnished truth, was too dangerous, too destructive. I was left alone with my son and an agonizing, necessary secret. The burden was mine forever. I will spend the rest of my life watching over Caleb while fighting off the guilt of a choice they will never understand. And sometimes, late at night, I still wonder if I chose right. Not for the outcome, but for the legacy. Was silence the best way to honor a love so profound it cost one of us everything?